Augustus Mays with EdTrust. He's the Vice President of Partnerships and Engagement. Welcome to Let's Talk.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Augustus, are you weird?
Absolutely. I think folks would be lying to themselves if they didn't really admit to themselves that they are weird. So yes, I have a little bit of weirdness in me too.
All right, that's cool. That's cool. So tell us a little bit about EdTrust. What is it? What's your program and what do you do?
Yeah, so EdTrust is a national nonprofit organization that uses data, research, and advocacy to uplift the racial and economic inequities within our public education system. And we're particularly focused on Black, Brown, and low-income students, and really trying to ensure that those barriers that prevent them from potentially having an equitable and sound basic education are removed. And so we do work all across the country. We have a presence in the West, the Midwest, the South, the Northeast. And so we do a lot of state and local advocacy, as well as we do a lot of advocacy at the federal level here in Washington, D.C.
So for locally, I mean, what are some of the issues that EdTrust may be focusing on in the DMV?
Well, in the DMV, a lot of our work nationally, which also touches on in the DMV.
Okay, all right.
And we do work in Maryland as well.
Right.
But a lot of our work focuses on, teacher diversity, school climate and culture, as you were discussing with your previous guest, where we really try to uplift sort of the Black experience and making sure educators are culture responsive in how they, address the diversity of our children and our students. And we also do a lot of work in assessment and accountability. And then on the higher ed side, we do a lot of work around access and affordability and making sure that campuses across the country, be it an HBCU or a predominantly white institution, provides the support, the culture responsive supports for Black students. So we do a wide array of work.
Yeah.
So at higher ed.
So we're in a time and space right now where everything that you all do is being taken off the table. And the reason why I've heard, I don't know totally why, but the president has said, or his folks have said that, the United States education system is out of the top 40. We're number 40. We're the lowest. I don't know who is grading that, but and now we're talking about abolishing the Department of Education and kind of dispersing its responsibilities in different other agencies. How does that hit you? I mean, what's your response to that?
Well, first, when we talk about the president and his radical conservative ideas, we really have to sort of take a step back and look at what he's actually trying to attempt to do by undoing the system that really uplifts and supports our students nationally through the U.S. Department of Ed. But what he's really trying to do is trying to dismantle what this country has been working on since its inception, which is addressing its original sin, which includes slavery, which includes the suppression of women and their right to vote and their right to have a level playing field with men. It includes, the Jim Crow laws that suppressed and segregated our society and deeply impacted the Black community. And it also includes the positive side of it, right? Since the civil rights movement, all of the policies and infrastructure that was created at the federal level to provide an equal playing field so that you had programs like ESEA, which also is supported a lot of the programs and resources that come out of the U.S. Department of Ed and other civil rights protections. He is trying to dismantle the federal infrastructure that is really trying to allow this country to be the best that it can be, which is a diverse democracy. So his attacks on education, which I think he sees as a way in which to hinder and also blunt the ability for Black and Brown people to have chances at economic mobility. So this is a direct attack on public education, which educates 90% of this country. And he's also trying to hide or provide a different story, a story that we've been used to, right, in this country of really a whitewashed history of the United States of America, and really not leaning on our strengths, which is we're becoming a minority majority country that is diverse, that has a wealth of perspectives, a wealth of assets, And he wants to make sure, honestly, that we return to an era where white men had advantage over the rest of the country.
So one of the things that I mentioned at an event 4 weeks ago, when it comes to some of the topics that you're discussing, is that it was in my, I guess, 7th or 8th grade year of junior high school. Then we didn't have middle school, when Dr. King was assassinated. And it was that year that our school, anybody went to Rabault Junior High School in DC, may remember that we got our first Black history teacher. And it changed my life, right? Also because of the family I came from, but the teacher actually changed my life. I've been trying to find him since then, because he was only with us for 1 year. Went to DC public schools, predominantly Black school system, always went to public schools in the district. It was the only year I had Black history, and it has not returned. So, I mean, while I'm concerned, and I like what you're talking about with regards to, diversity and culture and all that, our school system's not teaching these things. So if you, what is EdTrust doing to ensure that we don't have the conditions that we do have currently that would make a president, regardless of his, whatever his white supremacist thoughts are, what are we doing to make sure that our kids are actually faring better in schools? It's a lot we could say that's positive. I don't want to stay on the negative, but we know that our school systems need to be improved. The outcomes need to be better. So let's talk about some of the initiatives that EdTrust has put in place to really support that.
Yes, but before I move to that, though, okay. I want your listeners to understand the gravity of this moment, though.
Please.
Because you need to understand the federal role in education, your viewers do, before we move on to really talking about what they can do in their local communities, what their local school, their local district can do to push back against these efforts that are coming at the federal level. All right, so the U.S. Department of Education, Congress provides it $79 billion annually at the current moment. And what that means is, in terms of real terms for families and students, is that when you think about how education is funded in this country, the majority of funding does come from state and local governments, but 10% of funding comes from the federal government. And for low wealth districts or districts that are predominantly served by Black and brown families, that 10% is really higher than that. In some instances, it's 30% or 40% of the share of how funding goes to our schools. And then also some of that money that goes directly to low wealth or struggling schools supports a lot of academic initiatives that you were alluding to. So it allows districts and schools to pay for a diverse educator workforce, targeting educators of color to be embedded in schools. It also allows for professional learning and training supports for teachers and school leaders to learn about the most innovative instructional practices, be it literacy, be it math, be it social studies. It also supports what your last guest was talking about. When we have situations in schools where kids are being bullied, right, and don't know who to turn to, or educators don't feel equipped about how to talk to a diverse student body, that funding comes from the U.S. Department of Ed to support districts and schools to be able to access that. Or when you're talking about, last thing I'll say, when you're talking about data, the importance of civil rights protections. So understanding how districts are performing and disaggregating that data on racial disparities around graduation rates or school discipline, suspensions and expulsions, and how Black kids are being disproportionately affected by that. That data that the U.S. Department of Ed holds allows then the federal government to intervene with those districts who aren't treating or supporting our Black kids in a way that is equitable. And so then they enforce those civil rights protections to ensure that happens. So if all of those resources that I just talked about go away by the elimination of the Department of Ed, then we have a situation where it goes back to states. You hear the president talking about states' rights all the time. Well, that is code for let's go back to an era when Black and brown kids were invisible, that they weren't seen, that they weren't held accountable for not providing them a sound basic education. So if that were to go away, that's what's at stake. So all the positive things, the things that should be happening in our schools, that are happening in some places, despite the barriers that our Black community faces, there's excellence happening every day. And the work that we do at EdTrust is uplifting that, right? Like, for example, to answer your question now,
Okay.
We are part of the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign that is led by EdTrust and a lot of our national partners. Our goal is to increase or diversify the educator workforce by 1 million strong in 10 years. We're about, almost halfway through that. We've held many convenings across the country, bringing Black educators together, one, as a community, so they can know one another are out there, but they can also learn from one another, coming across from different parts of the country, to understand they have power as educators to also be advocates, to also advocate to their local superintendent or their local school board, to put pressure on them to actually focus on this issue. And we also have a wide array of federal policy recommendations and things that we're doing on Capitol Hill to get Congress and the Department of Ed to focus on that. So if the Department of Ed's role were affected by this pending executive order that the president says he's going to drop, then I think that could potentially impact things like educator diversity or fair funding for schools that need additional funding to provide the supports that students need.
I think you have laid the groundwork also in this conversation about why voting is important. Mm-hmm. Because people have been talking about that. The greatest impact that we can have is not necessarily who we vote for president, but who we vote for on a local level. Our council members, our state representatives, our school board members. And a lot of times we take those elections for granted. We don't know the people. We just check boxes if we vote at all. But recognizing the fact that however this goes, whether it stays the same or it changes, that if it's the local, if that money comes through to the state or to the district in this case, that we need to hold our state officials accountable for what needs to happen, even when we're talking about diversity of teachers, all of that. I mean, and we're getting ready to come up on elections in another 2 years. Thank goodness, then maybe there'll be a change. But I mean, what say ye about, the impact of voting on initiatives like what EdTrust focuses on?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think local advocacy and engagement, especially when it comes to education, because a lot of the decisions, be it whatever, again, you're hearing from the Trump administration about, federal education being national and indoctrinating our kids around what they are learning or should be learning. Education in this country has always been a state and local issue. Mm-hmm. That's where curriculum is decided. That's where resources, the majority of them, as I said before, are allocated and dispersed. The federal government only really provides as a watchdog over civil rights protections, and then it provides additional resources and supports those schools that need it. So to your point, yes, to your listeners in the DMV, it's really important that you are engaged, right, with your local school board, with your local and state officials, to get them to understand the importance of public education. Like I said, 90% of our kids, I have 3 kids myself that are in public school right now. 90% of our kids in this country go to public schools. And if you look at the executive orders that the president has put out recently, it's all by design. You have an executive order that went around school choice, which really focuses on vouchers to go to private schools. Only 10% of our students across the country go to those types of schools, and they're predominantly white, affluent students. When you take a look at his executive order of banning basically diversity and equity inclusion practices and approaches in schools, that's his attempt to quell and stop the ability for us to talk about culture responsive education in terms of our educators, our curriculum. So all these attacks are attacked to dismantle public education. And so it's important that if they do try to attempt to dismantle the U.S. Department of Ed, it's important to remember that 60% of all federal resources go to almost every district and state in this country. So not only are Black and brown people going to be affected, white people are going to be affected as well. And so we do have power in numbers in that. And so I think it's important as a community that we uplift, what's been working well for our students and why federal resources have been helping to support that. And if it goes away, those won't continue. But also to uplift the importance of what the Department of Ed has served for the Black community, which is civil rights protections. That if there are things that are going on in our schools that are inequitable and are disproportionately impacting Black kids, that it's the U.S. Department of Ed historically that has made sure states do right by us. Mm-hmm. And we know, and we know just by history, that when we have left states up to decide who gets the best education and who doesn't, they haven't always done right by our community. I think there are good state actors out there, but not every state. So it's very important for folks to stay engaged and stay informed, watch what's happening at the federal level. Go to edtrust.org.
That was my next question, right?
Yeah, go to our different social media sites that we have. But I also think it's important to also just be engaged with your local officials, state and local officials. Again, uplift what you could really be doing in terms of making sure that they hold the federal government accountable to maintaining public funds for public schools, and also for them to work with EdTrust, because we do have, like I said, on the ground in different states where we're working with, like in Maryland, we work with the Maryland Alliance for Racial Equity in Education, or MARI. It's a statewide coalition of many racial equity education organizations. And we go to Annapolis frequently to advocate for educational equity opportunities and initiatives. And we will be engaged through that group here in the DMV in Maryland specifically to really make sure that not only the state is doing right by Black and brown kids in that state, but also put pressure on our federal delegation in Maryland to ensure that they push back against the Trump administration and the harmful policies that they're trying to.
We're about out of time, but two questions. Number one, we're talking about I guess public school education, but there's also going to be an impact on HBCUs. Am I correct?
That is correct. Yes. Okay. I mean, we've already been. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I want you to go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, yeah. I mean, we've already been seeing that take place. So a lot of the stuff that we're seeing at the federal level has been taking place in the states for the past 3 years. Mm-hmm. So we've seen in Texas, for example, there's a bill called Senate Bill 17 that basically told public universities that you could not provide the kind of supports that Black and brown students have always benefited from to ensure that they had an equal playing field once they entered college. So that's like scholarships that were targeted to support Black students who might not have the means to go to college, or academic offices that really provided support for Black student initiatives so that they not only got into college, but they'd be able to complete. They banned that, made that unlawful, right? And so we've been pushing back in states like Texas and Tennessee and Kentucky where that has emerged. And that can also potentially, even though President Trump has been very supportive of HBCUs in Trump 1.0, the fact that he's trying to dismantle the very academic supports that ensure that our students are successful when they enter college and also when they complete it is also very, very worrisome for us. And so we have, when you go to edtrust.org, we have a DEI toolkit that has a number of resources on there around how the public can be engaged and informed about what DEI means for Black students, but also how you can be an advocate yourself within your respective states or in the states that maybe EdTrust has a presence, and work with us to help uplift the importance of having those kinds of academic supports that are really geared toward Black student excellence.
So you answered both of my questions in one, because that was the second part to this. I know we have parents on this call show right now because they responded to the weirdo book that we just talked about and what's happening with their kids. And I'm sure these parents also want to be engaged in how, in ways to ensure that there aren't any continued losses for their children in the education system. So you're saying that they can go to EdTrust's website and get resources and tools. And maybe even if, they wanted to bring somebody to a PTA meeting or something. I mean, does EdTrust give that kind of on the ground
Yes,
support?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, please go to our website, go to our social platforms on IG, on X, on Facebook. We have put out a lot of content there. You can get in touch with us there. But I would also say, like, reach out to me. Go to our website. You can contact me directly. But yes, we provide a lot of trainings and supports for parent advocates to know how to engage, what questions to ask policymakers, or how to write testimony or give testimony. And so on these issues that we're talking about today on your show, we'll definitely, as we are tracking and monitoring what happens with any potential executive actions that the Trump administration tries to take, we will definitely have campaigns and opportunities for parents in their respective local communities to get involved with EdTrust to push back.
Wonderful. Since you offered, can we get that email address for you?
Yes, it is amays@edtrust.org.
That's easy. A Mays, M-A-Y-S?
Correct.
Okay.
amays@edtrust.org.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Nikki Grayson has just posted something as well, again, to learn more about EdTrust. Thank you, Nikki, for being on the sidelines, helping to communicate with our audiences. Augustus, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me, and really, please reach out to us. We look forward to working with you. We're stronger in numbers, so we need y'all in the fight. So thank you for giving us the platform to share the information with your audience today.
Oh, we're gonna have you back because there's more to talk about as we go forward. Yeah. So anyway, thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. All right. Have a good one.